Jonas Vingegaard just told the world that his own teammate might be the reason he wins his third Tour de France. Not Sepp Kuss. Not a star signing. A guy that 90% of cycling fans could not pick out of a lineup 6 months ago. So why is a two-time Tour champion suddenly building his entire title defense around a rider nobody outside the sport has even heard of? Let's find out together. His name is Matteo Jorgenson, and I want to be upfront with you about something before we go any further. This is not a story about a kid who came out of nowhere. This is something stranger. This is a story about a rider who already had everything mapped out for him, a clear path, a defined role, and who tore that plan apart on purpose right when it mattered most. And the man at the center of his decision to do that is the same man he is supposed to be protecting at the Tour de France this July. Keep watching cause, this is going to impress you. Jorgenson is American, he is 26 years old, and going into this season, he had already built himself a reputation as one of the most reliable stage racers in the entire World Tour. He had a Paris-Nice title to defend. He had cobbled classics on his calendar, where he had previously gone solo to win Dwars door Vlaanderen. He had a clear identity inside Visma Lease, a bike as a Flanders specialist with genuine general classification upside. Everything about his career trajectory pointed in one direction. And then, at the start of 2026, he stood up at his own team's season launch and basically said none of that interested him anymore. He dropped the cobbled classics. He dropped Paris-Nice entirely. He turned his back on the exact identity that had made him valuable in the first place, and instead he pointed his entire spring toward the Ardennes, toward Liège-Bastogne-Liège specifically, a race that demands a completely different kind of rider than the one he had spent 2 years building himself into. When asked why, his answer was almost unsettlingly simple. He said the last 2 seasons had felt nearly identical, and that something inside him needed a change. Now here's the part that should make you pause. Don't go anywhere. The most unbelievable part is still coming. Most professional athletes do not get to make decisions like that. Teams build careers around predictability, around riders staying in their lane because that lane is producing results. For Jorgenson to walk away from a title defense and a cobbled classics program that had already produced a monument-adjacent win, his own management had to actually sit down and ask their riders what they wanted instead of just telling them. That conversation happened. And what came out of it was Jorgenson tearing up his own resume to chase something that, on paper, made very little sense. So how did that gamble actually play out? Because this is where things get genuinely strange. The real story starts now. He went to Tirreno Adriatico and finished 2nd overall. He lined up at Strade Bianchi, a race built for punchers and classics riders with a different engine than his, and still finished 8th against the best one-day specialists alive. Then he carried that form straight into the Ardennes, into the exact block of racing he had reorganized his entire season around, and he produced his best result yet at the Tour de Suisse, racing as an outright general classification leader for the first time in years, something he later admitted was a personal dream he had been chasing quietly. You're not ready for what's coming next. In the middle of all that progress, Jorgenson hit a wall. At the Tour Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes, the race formerly known as the Critérium du Dauphiné, on the final decisive climb, he completely cracked. His own words were blunt. He said he blew himself up. He slipped straight off the provisional podium in real time, in front of cameras, in front of a field that included several of the same riders he will be racing against at the actual Tour de France in a matter of days. For a rider who had just spent the spring proving he belonged in elite company, that kind of public collapse on the exact terrain that mirrors the Tour should have been a massive red flag. And yet, 3 days earlier, on the very same race, Jorgenson had done something that nobody outside the team seemed to fully register at the time. Hang on, it gets even better. Stage 3 of that race was a team time trial, 28.4 kilometers around the town of Perreux, deliberately scheduled by organizers as a dress rehearsal for the opening stage of this year's Tour de France, which also happens to be a team time trial in Barcelona. Visma went into that stage chasing Ineos, who had set the early benchmark and were leading at every intermediate checkpoint. And then, in the closing kilometers, Visma surged. Jorgenson was the rider driving that uphill finale, the one tasked with delivering the team across the line, and he produced a winning time that beat Ineos by 9 full seconds over almost 30 kilometers of racing. 9 seconds might not sound dramatic to you right now, but in a discipline where teams are separated by fractions, 9 seconds is an execution gap, not a talent gap. It is the difference between a team that is simply fit and a team that has one rider capable of physically pulling 5 or 6 other grown men through the final kilometers of a time trial when their legs are already empty. That detail right there tells you something about where Jorgenson actually fits inside this Visma Lease bike team, and it is not where you would expect. But that's not even the craziest part, because here is the situation heading into Barcelona on July the 4th. Wout van Aert, a 10-time Tour stage winner who has started this race for 7 consecutive years, will not be on the start line. He crashed in training, developed an infection in the wound on his elbow, and despite still racing through the pain to win a stage at the Dauphiné, the team has now ruled him out entirely. That is an enormous loss for Vingegaard, arguably the single biggest disruption to his support structure heading into a race where he is chasing his 3rd yellow jersey. Visma needed somebody to step directly into that vacuum, somebody capable of handling both the high mountains and the kind of explosive, technical racing that Van Aert used to provide. They chose Jorgenson. And Vingegaard did not just quietly accept that decision. He spoke about it publicly in a way that tells you exactly how much trust has shifted inside that team. He said that having Jorgenson and Sepp Kuss as his key mountain lieutenants gives him real belief, and that this belief spreads through the entire squad. Read between the lines on that for a second. A 2-time Tour de France champion, a rider with the kind of credibility that makes other riders simply follow his wheel without question, just told the cycling world that an American who was racing cobbled classics 2 years ago is now one of the 2 riders he trusts most when the race gets hard in the mountains. So now I want you to sit with the actual contradiction sitting at the center of this entire story, because it is the same contradiction Vingegaard himself has to be wrestling with right now. His next moment rewrites everything you thought you knew. 3 days before the Dauphiné ended, Jorgenson looked like the strongest rider in that entire race over almost 30 kilometers of pure effort. 3 days later, on a single climb, he completely fell apart. Those 2 versions of the same rider, separated by 72 hours, are about to walk straight into a 3-week Grand Tour where both of those versions could show up on any given day. And there is something else here that nobody is talking about enough, something that should genuinely unsettle every team built around protecting a single leader at the Tour de France this summer. Jorgenson himself admitted, in an interview given just months ago, that he still dreams of testing his own 3-week capacity as a leader, not a domestique. He said it plainly. The ambition to lead a Grand Tour himself has not gone away just because his program for this specific July points entirely towards serving somebody else. Visma even had an opening for exactly that kind of opportunity after Simon Yates, their reigning Giro champion, shocked the sport with a sudden retirement, leaving a leadership gap that several insiders assumed Jorgenson might be promoted into. Instead, the team chose to keep him in a support role for Vingegaard's Tour bid, and Jorgenson, by his own admission, said yes to that decision without resistance. Why would a rider with genuine yellow jersey ambition agree to spend 3 more weeks working entirely for somebody else? The next reveal changes everything. I think the honest answer is sitting right there in something Jorgenson said about his own season, and it is the kind of quote that explains more about his mentality than any result could. He said that no matter how much leadership responsibility he carries elsewhere, no matter what happens in the spring or in Switzerland, his season will still be judged by what happens in France in July, not by his own results, by how well Vingegaard rides because of him. That is either remarkable loyalty, or it is a rider quietly building leverage for a future where the team has no choice but to hand him the keys. Here's what we actually know heading into Barcelona. Jorgenson is faster right now over a long, brutal time trial effort than anyone else inside one of the strongest teams in the world. He is also capable of completely emptying the tank on a single climb when the moment demands it, which is either a weakness still waiting to be exposed at altitude in the Pyrenees, or it is exactly the kind of all-in effort Vingegaard is going to need from him in the exact moment Pogačar decides to attack on a mountain stage and break this race apart. And somewhere in the middle of all of that sits a 26-year-old American who 2 years ago was best known for winning bike races on cobblestones, and who is now, according to the 2-time defending runner-up to the most dominant rider of this generation, one of the 2 men he trusts most to get him back to the top of the podium in Paris. Keep your eyes on the screen. The Tour de France starts on July the 4th in Barcelona with that exact same team time trial format that Jorgenson just dominated in France. If history from the last few weeks means anything at all, the opening stage of this entire race could already tell us who actually controls the balance of power inside that Visma Lease bike team car, and whether the plan everyone agreed to back in January is the plan that survives the first mountain stage. I genuinely do not know which version of Matteo Jorgenson shows up in the Pyrenees, the one who beat Ineos by 9 seconds, or the one who cracked completely on a single decisive climb just days later.